I'm making a city builder. In the last devlog, I laid down the groundwork of a cozy little game in the desert. But playtime's over. I've spent the last couple of months turning my chill city builder into a proper survival game. Thanks again to everybody who posted suggestions in the previous devlog. Your ideas are always welcome and it helped me a lot. At the end of the last devlog, I teased the sandstorm that makes the sand move. I want it to be the main mechanic of the survival aspect of the game. That being said, at the moment it only happens when pressing a debug key, mostly because the rest of the game is not ready for the sandstorm yet. So it's time to make it ready. First thing I changed was blocking the player from building on sand. This little change had such a huge impact. There's now a lot more strategy in placing the building, and the sandstorm will reduce the playable area every time. I had to rework the procedural generation though, to be sure to have plenty of dirt and grass in the starting area, and at least some rock and water to help the player to get started. One of the main skills asked from Citybuilder players is managing resource. Since gathering food and water was happening at the same time it was consumed, as long as you had enough, you never had to really think about it, making it feel like the game was managing the resources automatically, which was kinda boring. I split the food and water generation in 4 to happen at the same time as money generation, allowing the player to make mistakes and spend too much resources, leading to losing some civilians, which then allowed to finally make a losing condition. Once all civilians die from hunger or thirst, the player loses the game. One issue though was that the town center, the first building the player builds that give an initial amount of food, water and money production, would give enough resource to keep a small number of civilians alive forever, making it impossible to lose. So I made the town center have a limited amount of resources it can give, that will eventually run out, so it will help players start, but require them to find an alternative source of production in the long run. I also added a warning when the town center is about to run out, so the player is not surprised by the sudden change in production. With the food and water split in 4, it made me realize I could do the same with money. Something consistent in my game was that the money cost was super high, in the thousands, while stuff involving food and water was in the 2 digits. So I scaled all money income and cost by around 4, to be able to deal with smaller numbers. Then it was time for some quality of life stuff. I made it so that there is a maximum civilians that can die from hunger and thirst in a single day, so that an unlucky player doesn't get totally wiped by surprise. Selected civilians now have a preview of their animation in the UI to understand what they are currently doing without having to directly look at them. Players can now select a civilian or building through a log event to focus the camera on the event and better understand what's going on. Also used when selecting a civilian assigned to a building or selecting the closest unassigned civilian. At this point, the sandstorm was only happening from left to right, so I added support for the sandstorm to come from all 4 directions, with new art when going up or down. Before I can make the sandstorm happen automatically, I need a way for the player to fight back. I made a new auto-tiling tile set for walls. Walls block the spreading of sand from the storms. They take damage when blocking sand and are destroyed after 3 hits. Since the sandstorm will change the terrain, I wanted the player to be able to change the terrain as well. I added diggers that can turn back sand tiles into dirt tiles. A new addition mode allows the player to assign tiles to be digged for a cost of water if the tile is next to dirt or grass, to expand the playable area, undo the damage of the sandstorm, and have more control over the terrain. Since buildings can no longer be built over sand, it made sense to disable buildings unencumbered by moving sand, and diggers can make them operational again. Because the walls are blocking civilian paths, I expanded the wall tileset to add wall doors that are functionally the same as walls, except they can be walked through and are more expensive. allowing some strategy to try to optimize the price without blocking your civilians. They can also be placed over already existing walls. I want the Sandstorm to be the hook of my game. I want it to be that Citybuilder with sandstorms. So it was time to make it more epic and meaningful. First, I made a wind effect that would not only tell the player that the storm is coming, but also from which direction. Then I switched the music to something epic to build up the tension and make it clear that something special is happening. Camera shakes and sound effects when the tiles are turned into sand, and leaving some twig residue so the player can look around and see the extent of the storm damage, giving a feel of calm after the storm. One problem I had though was the wind effect would appear instantly and the fog would disappear instantly as well. Because I'm making pixel art, I've been able to avoid learning anything about Unreal's materials so far. I'm first and foremost a programmer, not an artist, and I'm scared of the unknown, but there was no avoiding it. After learning from a YouTube tutorial, I managed to make the wind and fog gradually fade in transparency. I'm sure this newfound skill will help me in the future at some point. With the sandstorm sequence all set up, I was finally able to make the sandstorm happen periodically during the game, with a longer delay on the first storm to leave some time for the player to prepare. With my main mechanic finally in place, something was long overdue. It was time to step back and play my own game. And I actually ended up playing it for 3 hours straight. I consider it a huge milestone when I can finally play my game just for the fun of it. I ran into a couple of bugs that I fixed, and tweaked the balancing, then played again, tweaked the numbers more and played again, rinse and repeat. Iteration is a cornerstone of good game design. Once I was happy with the new balancing, after playing my game a lot, it was clear that the thing missing was the ability to destroy buildings. Expanding walls would leave useless walls in the way, mines with no more rock tiles around were useless, and misplaced buildings were a lifelong commitment. Inspired by how diggers worked, I created a new edition mode meant to destroy buildings. With a new cursor, and reusing my newfound knowledge of materials, I made the buildings turn red when hovered, so the player understands what they are about to destroy. Destroying a building refunds part of the money, a little less for damaged walls. I added edition mode selection in the UI, to allow to not only select the demolition mode, but also the digging mode, so the player doesn't have to find the digger building to be able to assign new digging spots. Since the first sandstorm of the game happens after a long delay to allow the player to set up, the player can be surprised by the arrival of the first sandstorm. So I wanted to give some hints to the player of how much time passed and how urgent it is to prepare for the sandstorms. A couple of minutes before the first sandstorm, a neutral civilian arrives from the direction the first sandstorm will come from, allowing to start building walls in that direction, making the first sandstorm easier to fight. The player will be notified of the arrival of the civilian that will hang around the town center for some time. By selecting the civilian, players can talk to them and have exhibition text introducing a little bit of the story and warn the player about the storm and give hints to build walls and diggers to fight it back. Then, not long before the first sandstorm, another neutral civilian coming from the same direction will appear and simply die right away, for a final warning and a bit of tension before the storm. After playing my game a little more, I felt there was two problems in my game. Before I added the sandstorm, players would just build everywhere on the map, and the lack of building density made it not really feel like a city with any meaningful building placement. After the sandstorm, I had the opposite problem. The best tactic is to turtle up with walls and build a concentrated city in the center of the map, leaving the majority of the map unexplored. The second problem was the very beginning of the game. You would spend a lot of time just waiting for money with nothing to do. To fix both of those issues, I created lootable boxes that can be interacted with by civilians and give an amount of resources. I made one always spawn near the center with a small amount of money, so that the player can gather it and fast forward the initial constructions, which is more engaging than simply giving more money to the player on the start. I also spawned more of them further into the map that can have water, food or money to reward the player for exploring. It also allowed me to start working on the win condition. The player will have to explore further to find 4 boxes giving a new special resource that will be used for a final showdown with the Sandstorm. I'm currently working on it, which will allow me to finally have a vertical slice of my game, playable from start to finish. And you know what it means. Playtesting. I'll be asking some of my game dev friends to playtest my game and give me feedback. Stick around for the next devlog if you want to know what they'll have to say about my game.